Scientist Astronautics, and we're going to get to that in just a moment, but we do want to remind you that earlier this month, we announced the launch of our Center for Innovation and Education. The Center for Innovation and Education creates and delivers inclusive, innovative, and sustainable workforce development and economic opportunity programs that enable all people to actively participate in the space economy. Through public and private partnerships, the center engages students, young leaders, entrepreneurs, and professionals. And we encourage you to learn more about the new Center for Innovation and Education and how you can make an impact at www.spacefoundation.com/CIE. And without further ado, let's welcome our guest to the show today, Dr. Jason Reimuller, who is the Executive Director of Project PoSSUM, and that encapsulates about 15 other things, and we're going to talk about all those things today. So, Jason, we're so glad to have you on the show today, and also have you back in the country after a crazy journey that you've been on.
Hey, Ron, thanks for the introduction. As always, it's good to chat with you. Congratulations on your continuing success. You're doing so much of a wonderful service to get people inspired and excited in STEM and space. I mean, what better way to get people involved in STEM and science than space?
Agreed. That's it. That's where we all want to go, right? So we're actually going to start with that. How did you first get inspired to get into space and the science industry?
In this space, I don't remember a part of my life where I wasn't involved in space. As I like to, a little story I like to share is that I grew up very close to my grandfather. He was a career aviator. He was a general, flew B-25s in the war. Joseph Heller, the author of Catch-22, served under my granddad, and in his book later, he based all the fictional characters on the real life counterparts. Well, the main antagonist was Colonel Cathcart. Well, Colonel Cathcart was my grandfather. So anyway, that's the environment I grew up in, having that influence and everything about planes and aviation, and of course space. So I was always the geeky kid in the nonfiction section in second grade that could list every section of a Apollo lunar trajectory. So that's basically how I grew up. And then science, math, having the privilege of that background, growing up in a house full of books, the grandfather that had those experiences, and people had the time to share was, I feel, one of my greatest privileges, probably the greatest privilege of my life. And, it's something that I've endeavored to try to create avenues to give back.
Excellent. And so you actually have a field of study that maybe a lot of people haven't heard of. And I think the only reason I heard of it was because of you, which is aeronomy. So let's talk a little bit about your field of study, what you do, what you have your PhD in, and then we'll get into a little bit of all the things that PoSSUM's doing.
It's okay, Ron, because I didn't know what aeronomy was either. When I came to the University of Colorado, I fortunate while working on a project, I came across the research of Dr. Jeff Thayer, who was to be my advisor. And at that time, I hadn't really thought about anything about aeronomy. I had a background in physics and flight test engineering. So I came to University of Colorado and started learning about these things called noctilucent clouds. Well, I didn't know about noctilucent clouds either, but I learned that they were high altitude space clouds and they were over polar regions. And it was a good opportunity to incorporate what I had learned in flight test engineering and aviation to be able to enable novel research. So sign me up. And so aeronomy is the study of our upper atmosphere. Atmospheric science is typically our troposphere and our stratosphere, up to about 50 kilometers. But above that, it's a little bit different because ionization, the electrodynamics of the atmosphere itself plays a driving role. So the physics are different in our mesosphere and our lower thermosphere. So we've been using the term aeronomy. And so that's something that we realized that one of the major aspects of PoSSUM is an education and public outreach, because most people don't know anything about our mesosphere. It's been jokingly called our ignorosphere. They don't know about aeronomy. They don't really know about noctilucent clouds. And it's a shame because this is the most, arguably the most sensitive part of our whole planet, and one of the best places to understand things like global climate change, anthropomorphic changes, and in understanding how to better design hypersonic vehicles. Comparative planetologists use this as a good analog for low density atmospheres on places like Mars. So that's something that we're fundamentally trying to change, is an awareness of what aeronomy is.
Excellent. So, I mean, let's dive right into it. That brings up the Citizen Scientist Astronautics Program that 4 years later I still cannot say right the first time. We call it Project PoSSUM. So, can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to create it, and then a little bit about what the program does?
Well, I can't take the credit for creating it. It is really a grassroots effort, and there have been so many amazing people like yourself that have contributed to the evolution of this program. But the origins of PoSSUM really came as a research program. PoSSUM is an acronym for Polar Suborbital Science in the Upper Mesosphere. So polar being at high latitudes, where you can see some of the strongest interactions of the solar environment and the terrestrial environment. And suborbital, ways we can incorporate suborbital vehicles, whether they're aircraft or balloons, or the onset of reusable suborbital vehicles originally designed for tourism that we're finding so many ways we can actually enable novel science with. So the program came essentially as an extension of my own dissertation. I modified a Mooney aircraft and flew it up to a town in North Canada called High Level, and from that was able to coordinate observations with a satellite that was looking at noctilucent clouds from a sun-synchronous orbit. And that became a key element of my dissertation. When we had presented the results at an international conference, what became our core science team thought, well, wouldn't be a good idea to extend upon this experiment and use one of these space vehicles that are designed for tourism, these vehicles designed to go 100,000 or 100 kilometers because someone long ago defined that altitude as what you need to go to be called a, quote, astronaut. So they're designing this to appeal to a tourist market, happened to be an ideal altitude to do tomography, 3D models of this main observable of our upper atmosphere in a way we can see things like turbulence and instability, turbulent dynamics in a way that we've never been able to see before anywhere in our solar system. And to combine that with in situ measurements of aerosol particles, temperatures, a way to be able to model the mesosphere in ways that we've never been able to do. So we put a proposal together to NASA Flight Opportunities, and it was accepted at the time. The only human-tended experiment that was brought in, and that we realized from that it excited a lot of people because it took quite a lot of skills to be able to operate the instruments, design the instruments, and operate the instruments on a profile like that. And so we realized what a great opportunity to do an education and outreach program. Here was a no-kidding human-tended experiment. You needed a human in the loop simply to be able to track features of interest. You couldn't see these from the ground. You couldn't see them from space. So that was how this started out, was a research program, an experiment. And since it had grown to incorporate many other of related aspects of research, we've brought on new tiers of research concentrations as the program's growing more and more international.
That will bring us to discuss a little bit about Otter, which is another program that has kind of stemmed from that. And the names are always cute, cuddly characters that will eat your face. So
only in Australia.
Only in Australia. Only in Australia. So let's discuss a little bit about Otter and how that was the next step.
Well, PoSSUM grew initially from the aeronomy experiment, and then we started designing instrumentation. Well, in order to design instrumentation, we needed to design it around how one could control it in presumably a pressurized or unpressurized spacesuit. So we started a partnership back in 2014 with a wonderful company called Final Frontier Design. And their chief designer had worked in Russia for 22 years, building these spacesuits. A lot of that heritage now is a part of this company, and the company works under a NASA Space Act agreement. So the spacesuits are used to help mature our instrumentation, but at the same time, we were building simulators that started the process of validating their spacesuits. When you have a spacesuit technologies associated with, it may work fine in a lab, but how do you raise the technology, their technology readiness, to where you can actually entrust somebody to put on that spacesuit and fly it, in an environment over the Armstrong line, where if there was a depressurization without that spacesuit working reliably, you won't survive. So we started working, maturing these suits in what we call our Bioastronautics Program, which started as microgravity research with the National Research Council of Canada. They have arguably one of the best aircraft for microgravity, for high quality microgravity, because of the rigidity of the wing, the airframe. It consistently brings in about 10 millig's of microgravity per parabola. So that started a relationship. We've been representing the National Research Council of Canada to researchers now through the US, not just through PoSSUM, but other research organizations that have supported payloads that have gone to the International Space Station, through NASA, through private industry. And then we bring in opportunities for our students or our partner universities to incorporate pure science research into our campaigns as well. So we do this once a year up in Ottawa. What else goes into qualifying a spacesuit? What else needs to be done? Well, if you have a need to egress, you have to make sure they're stable in water. If you eject out of a high altitude aircraft, they have to be able to land in water. So we formed a partnership with Survival Systems USA in Groton, Connecticut, and we turned what is their facility that they have traditionally done crew egress training for helicopter pilots, for aircraft pilots, and we built a spacecraft post-landing laboratory there with a mock-up of NASA's Orion vehicle. And we do courses there. We mature the spacesuits and test the way they behave in water, how the post-landing systems like egress bottles and life preserver units, biomonitoring systems, everything of the sort works in those environments. So that was the process that we had in raising those suits to that technology readiness. Well, now Final Frontier has a prototype EVA spacesuit. EVA spacesuits are what you see people working on the space station with, walking on the moon with. And so we came up with Project Otter. Basically, mesospheric modeling has always been the core of PoSSUM. And mesospheric modeling and EVA spacesuits are kind of become apples and oranges. So we've started to outgrow that original brand of PoSSUM, because PoSSUM really was an upper atmospheric research organization. So Otter became a separate research organization. Otter stands for Orbital Technologies and Tools for Extravehicular Research. And we started our first major research campaign together with the Canadian Space Agency. They have a lunar yard where they test robotic systems and rovers, and with the and with a collaboration with Kansas State University, we've been able to build a 2-axis gravity offset system, so we can simulate in lunar gravity and Martian gravity, even in zero-G, working with all sorts of different tools. Tools our students, our members, have been trained to design themselves and test in analog environments. And they've taken all of these tools and procedures, things that we've worked with in the actual environments that NASA uses for lunar analog. We've taken it to the Canadian Space Agency, and we've tested them in gravity offset there. So our next step then is looking into doing underwater tests with the EVA spacesuit. So everything is test a little, learn a little bit, crawl, walk, run, as they say in NASA.
Crawl, walk, run. I like that. Gotta do it a little bit at a time.
Yep.
So for those that may be interested in possibly coming and doing the training, people hear Astronautics Program and they immediately get terrified. I did, before I did it. But this is something that has really been developed for people of all education ranges. If you were, in a higher level of high school, really just starting college like I was, there are areas that you can train in this program. So let's talk a little bit about, what happens if somebody wants to sign up and they're selected to be one of the classes. I'm assuming that there will not be one this fall, but you'll move it into next year, or am I incorrect on that one?
We're tentatively looking at October for the program, with the understanding, the realities of the situation is we'll do it when it's safe for our members. We have a space medicine working group being led by Dr. Shona Pandya, looking right now at all the aspects to make spacesuit operations as safe as possible, given the reality here. And we'll look for consensus with all of our partner organizations for future courses.
And so you were mentioning a little bit about other courses that are available. So it's not just PoSSUM. There are quite a few of them, because there's an advanced astronautics program. So can we touch a little bit on that for people that say, okay, that sounds awesome, but what's next? what else is possible at PoSSUM. You just mentioned what Shauna, Dr. Pena does, who's been a guest on the show before. I know there's been some other really fun classes. EVA is part of that as well.
Certainly. Yeah, no, our institute, the academic institute that now manages PoSSUM and Otter, is called the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences, and that is at astronauticsinstitute.org. And the format is as much virtual instruction as possible, and then we have consolidated intense research or field campaigns that go along with that we try to put back to back in the spring and the fall to make it easier for our international members. We have members, I think, from 46 different countries now, and we think that's such a strength because we see all the diversity, the cultural and the national diversity, yet how similar everyone really is. The way people look at space, we look at things as humanity, as earthlings looking to step out in our cosmos, and certain values of science, appreciation for science that we all hold dear. So that's what we've. It's kind of the culture that we've built, and it's also that kind of radical diversity has really helped us look into some things with a wider pool of members that may have historically been possible. So you mentioned before about new members getting in. Undergraduates, we have 2 programs that bring people in. We have the Advanced PoSSUM Academy that we've had people from 17 years of age and up. And then we have the Scientist Astronaut Qualification Program for professionals with a degree. But we work very hard to, in everything that we do, matrix people. So this isn't a way, what makes our program different than, say, typical university that's more hierarchical is we try to matrix in as much as we can with subject matter experts and really try to encourage everyone to be able to champion and lead their own investigations. So we can have members that are freshmen or sophomores in high school the opportunity to lead their own investigations, to publish as a PI. That's something I think is very special about a citizen science organization. You come into a community and you find that the different campaigns we do, there's so many ways to not only to learn and work with the program, to play roles that are critical, not just to publishing and doing novel science, but also the safe operations of things, but also opportunities to incorporate your own research interests or your own technical interests. That is, we've had a number of success with some quite young members in our program, and to get to work in teams with also some very established aerospace professionals.
And so there's so many pieces to PoSSUM and everything that's being done there. And to separate out from that, it's also been a really open platform for others to come to you with ideas of ways that we could continue to expand what PoSSUM is. And one of those is PoSSUM 13. Mm-hmm. So we've talked a little bit about it on the show before, but those that may be new to it, let's talk a little bit about what the program is and what's going on with it, currently.
Certainly. PoSSUM 13. PoSSUM 13 is a nod to the Mercury 13. So as many might know, the Mercury 13 was a program that was led at the same time as the original Mercury 7 astronauts that all happened to be male. And there was a parallel investigation that brought in 13 women. Exceptional pilots and researchers as well. So the PoSSUM 13 is a nod to those founding members. And we realized that we have a program that approaches gender parity, and that we have some quite exceptional science communicators, in addition to being professional researchers themselves. Female members that we realize were incredibly inspirational, can be incredibly inspirational to especially girls and young women. So the PoSSUM 13 was founded on that as ways that we sponsor contests each year. The PoSSUM 13 Microgravity Challenge. The winner last year, the finalists, the 3 finalists from last year. One was a team from Mexico, one was from Guatemala, and the third was from Colombia. And Ivana Hernandez from Colombia ultimately won. We flew her and her mother up to the National Research Council, and she flew her experiments and those of the other finalists on a PoSSUM research mission herself, and which is a wonderful opportunity for not only empowering teams led from high school girls to work with our experts in taking that idea and really coming up with a flight ready experiment. And we worked with all finalists in the same manner. But now Ivana's been going through Colombia, talking to high schools. She's become a bit of a celebrity, I believe, in Colombia. And that's so amazing, because that's what people need to see. And that PoSSUM 13 is just one example of what we call Space for All. And how do you create a culture and a community that is radically inclusive and diverse and respectful of all the differences that we have, and show that, as I always like to say, if we're really going to be a multi-planetary species, and if we're really going to understand our shared climate, if we're going to understand how we're affecting our own world here, we have to be hitting on all cylinders. And if there are people out there that don't think for some reason that they have a place in science, that they don't have a future in science, or they're not being represented, well, that's a failure of us all. So that's why our program places quite a bit of emphasis in outreach programs like the PoSSUM 13, and also why so many of our members, when you see the ambassadors, that lead that program, there's a lot of allies working behind the scenes to make that happen.
And so Project PoSSUM, doesn't only have PoSSUM 13; it also has the works with the Astronaut Program project. So let's talk a little bit about that. What that program is and how people can get involved.
Certainly, Out Astronaut is another outreach program we do, and it's a very, as a gay man myself, it's a very personal venture. Realizing the opportunities that I'd still have, always felt like I was bridging different worlds, and then realizing later that about 40% of LGBTQ identified people leave in their freshman to sophomore years in school because they don't feel represented. They don't see, there have not been many out and open people in STEM, and that's too bad. So I've seen this play out. One of my big passions in life has been rugby, and I always like to use this as an example. I helped start a team in 1999 with Mark Bingham. Mark was one of the 4 rugby players that fought back on Flight 93 on September 11th. He was another founder of what was one of the first rugby teams out and affirming for gay athletes in the US, the San Francisco Fog. And at that time, there was only a couple teams in the world. And in 15 years, the tournament called the Bingham Cup that now bears his name is the largest international rugby tournament in the world, and it's played mostly by gay men. In 15 years, you change the culture, and when people feel represented, it's amazing what you can do. In that sport now, rugby is one of the most progressive leading sports in terms of inclusion. And so seeing how much has changed in culture in that way, there needed to be. Out Astronaut was something that seemed like it had needed to be in a way that we can create representation, and having contests that get people to talk, to come out publicly, to share their stories as LGBTQ identified people, and also as STEM professionals or students, get them publicly talking about, and we offer grants and contests, and hopefully build the program where we can actually train and launch people through this sequence of contests to do research that hosted through the International Institute of Astronautical Science through this program. So again, it's all about the representation and fostering a sense of inclusion to inspire more and more people into that they have a home in science.
And a moment ago when we were talking about PoSSUM 13, you mentioned Space for All, which has led to the idea of another part of Project PoSSUM called Space for All Nations. And to kind of look at all the different places in the world, very similar to we're kind of talking about Colombia. There's a lot of places in the world that are still working on developing a space agency or space in general. It's still something that is kind of new to them. So let's talk a little bit about Space for All Nations and what that means to the people out there that are just excited to get themselves and their country as involved as possible in space.
Indeed, and that's something that's been so incredible with Project PoSSUM has been the people that have come from countries that haven't had a space program and an opportunity for them to get involved in research that maybe just didn't exist in the country. And now we're seeing countries that are starting to come up with research presence. I love to give a shout out to University de La Valle in Guatemala, just launched the first national satellite, specifically to look at color ratios of lakes and natural resources to be able to monitor changes. We've been working with the university in Chile, looking at the Atacama and the unique research environment that provides. We have a lot of people that get in the program and use that as an avenue to get people excited in science through the inspirational power of space and specifically astronautics. So this is a great opportunity to not only what Space for All Nations does is it horizontally integrates, that ties together these emerging space nations that have presence within our program, and also we create avenues to get members involved in what we do in established countries, our research projects and programs here in Canada and the United States. So as you build an indigenous presence of research, there's so much that extends. There's so many ways to get students in the country involved. So the educational opportunities spin up greatly like that. And when you see somebody doing research in zero G or high performance aircraft or out on the edges of the earth, it's inspiring. And this is what people look up to. We want to take our members that are championing for this, and make them heroes, make them role models that people can look up to. The role models, should do a lot more than throw a ball around, or play sports. Role models should be the ones that are putting their necks out there to enable research that is really going to be of global benefit.
I mean, Jason, there's just so much that you're involved in or that you've inspired because of the program. And I know that so many people, just look at what you've done and are going to be blown away by it, and they're going to be inspired to follow in your footsteps. So is there any advice for anyone that, here's all the things that you're up to, all the people that you collaborate with, and says, you know what, I want to do something like that, and maybe give them a little bit of advice along the way?
People come from so many different avenues. It's hard to give a specific advice, but education never treats you wrong. Finding the right mentors, finding the right community, get involved. Find ways that you can get involved in the science process itself. We'd love to see you get involved with our program, of course, but I think just championing locally, whatever your calling is, talk, communicate, think about how you're communicating your science as much as doing the science. And indeed, Ron, you provide such an important link to this too. And some people may think, well, science isn't for me, I'm not good at math. Doesn't mean you don't have such an essential part in being a science literate culture. That's so important right now. Is that we need all types, not just the hardcore number crunchers that do mathematics. I mean, I admit I'm not a fan of doing mathematical models on the computer. That's a personal weakness, but it takes all time. If you're, artists, for example, people that have all sorts of creative avenues are essential, because the science is only as good as how well you communicate the science. And these are tools to reach out and explain what we're doing, why we're doing it, why people should care. Into channels that reach people's individual communities. And so, whatever your background is, being a part of science somehow, finding your niche, and working to be that science participatory culture. that's what I would recommend.
And it does look like we, like right here at the end, we got a question from the audience. This comes from Ashley Carter, and she wants to know what support is available for PoSSUM graduates regarding training and research opportunities.
Well, we're a very member-driven organization, and one of the first things we ask people to come in is why they're here, what they want to see out of this. There's so many opportunities for them to get in, but we also want people to know that this is a program that grows with them. If you have particular interests in research with an existing facility or existing opportunities, we want to incorporate that. So you'll see that a lot of this changes year to year as each class comes in. Things are incubated, and find that you propose something, you'll find the community that will support you.
And so for our last question, where can people find you on online? There's going to be a lot of them. So if you want to just pick one, we can say, hey, listen, go to the website and you'll find all the information there. But I know there's quite a lot.
Sure. Well, Project PoSSUM, projectpossum.org. We're a 501c3 US-based nonprofit. And then our educational partner is astronauticsinstitute.org. And that is our online learning management system. And then PoSSUM 13 and Space for All Nations, you'll see linked to the Project PoSSUM website, and OutAstronaut is at outastronaut.org.
Perfect. Jason, thank you so much for coming on today and just giving us a quick rundown of, that's the majority of the things. There's so much more that we could talk about with Project PoSSUM and everything that goes on. And I'm glad you were able to come on today and give us a little bit of background, because there's so many people that have asked about it, specifically because we've had so many other guests that are on that are part of it, including the host himself. So thank you for coming on today and just giving us all the details on this amazing program, the group of programs that it has now become.
Ron, thanks again for your advocacy and your hard work for science.
Thank you, sir. And everyone, that is going to conclude this episode of the live edition of Space Foundation Space4U podcast. You can subscribe to this podcast and leave us a review on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, and on Google Play. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and of course, our website, www.spacefoundation.org, where you can also learn about the various ways you can support the Space Foundation. And don't forget to visit www.discoverspace.org for more digital content for teachers, parents, and students. You can support the Space Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit, by visiting www.spacefoundation.org/donate. And on all these outlets and more, it's our goal to inspire, educate, connect, and advocate for the space community, because at the Space Foundation, we will always have space for you. Thank you, everyone, for watching. We will see you on Thursday when we speak with the one and only Loretta Whitesides from Yuri's Night and more. Bye, everybody.